So today we're going to discuss groups and communications. Absolutely fascinating. Of course, all these theories are. Again, I trust that you just become a seeker of knowledge in this area. I am firmly convinced that the best communicators are those who analyze communication consistently. They analyze both good and bad communication. Watch it, you read about it, you study it, and when you do those things, then you'll be able to see where is a strength, where is a weakness, what should I incorporate into my own communication, and what should I leave out. So I hope that all of these lectures just help you learn to be an analyzer of communication. All right, so today we're discussing groups and groups communication. You should be able to access your notes, so if you don't have those yet, I'd encourage you to go ahead and download those before we go any further. All right, so the question I want to start with is, do you think the study of group communication is new? I mean, in light of the age of Twitter and in light of the age of Facebook, in light of the age of a lot of modern technology, is the study of group communication itself new? What do you think about that? Of course, my answer to that would be no. You can take group communication all the way back to Jesus and 12 disciples, right? Technically, that would have been a small group. And we can certainly analyze their communications, their inner conflicts, their likes, their dislikes, as we read about them specifically in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in Scripture. And even before then, we most definitely had some groups and groups communication. Go back to the Tower of Babel. You have a large group, and we'll talk about what makes up a group, what are some qualifications. But the study of group communication is not new, but it is certainly necessary, especially in this era of technology. If you go all the way back to the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza, was alive during the 1600s. Absolutely fascinating individual. You should go look him up and read about him and some of his philosophies. They were interesting, but one thing that he is noted for saying is that humans are social animals, and thus other people have a great influence on our attitudes, our behavior, and even our perceptions. Very interesting. We are social creatures, aren't we? Uh, you might have some people who are quiet and some people who are hermits, but I think that we can say in the majority of the people around this globe, they are social. That's why social networking is so enormous these days. But even in the 1600s, there was a recognition of this issue. And because of that recognition, then you had books like Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. If you have not yet read that novel, I would encourage you to go do it. It's got some very interesting angles, but one of the issues at stake was, how does society perceive, how did society look upon and accept, reject those who had committed a sin? And obviously, if you've read it, you know that Hester was supposed to wear an A for her adulterous act, and she had to wear that for life. And really, read the Scarlet Letter again and look at it as a perception of groups, and how did the groups view certain things? How were the people of that day interested, and how did they communicate in and among themselves regarding that? What I want you to write down, one of the first things is to recognize one of the key individuals with this theory is a man by the name of Bruce Tuckman. Bruce Tuckman. And he really developed this sequential stage, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stages, that's known as the Tuckman Group Development Theory. And I think the name is really very self-explanatory. He says when we've got a small group, Tuckman would assert that there are 5 stages that this group will experience and go through. All right, stage number 1. Oh, sorry about that. Looked really good. And when we pull it up here into Angel, that's frustrating, isn't it? All right, so let me read that to you. Stage 1 is the forming stage. The forming stage. That's when members seek information about the other members and about the group itself. So members are seeking information about other people and general information about the group. If you think of a jury, perhaps, you've got a group of 12 people. They've been formed, they've been created, and now when they go to deliberate, perhaps they want to know a little bit about each other. Perhaps they understand that they as a group are to come to either a verdict of guilty or not guilty, or they're going to have a hung jury. But that's just really getting to know each other. Let me backtrack and make this notation that you might want to write to the edge. Failed to say this for you. When we are dealing with small groups in particular, we're thinking of that anywhere between 3, some books will say 12, other books I've read that say 15, but really we're looking at groups somewhere between 3 and 15. If you have 2 people, if you only have 2, a 2 is a dyad, and so then you just have really dyadic communication. So when we're dealing with a small group, we need at least 3, okay? At least 3 in that group. And then you'll need 2 things, 2 provisions for this group, all right? This group of somewhere between 3 and 15. Number 1 is you need to recognize that there is really an interdependence, okay? There's an interdependence in this group. The members, in other words, are affected by each other. If I am at work on a construction crew, and I need the electrician to come in ahead of me because I cannot progress any further with putting up the drywall until the electrician gets everything done. I am very interdependently related in this small construction group because if he fails to do his part, then I will be unable to go on and proceed with mine. All right, so there's an interdependence in this small group. Secondly, you need to recognize that in small groups there should be a common goal, that everybody's moving for this common goal. If you're working with perhaps a VBS at your church, the common goal is to create a wonderful week that can have a strong spiritual impact upon these children. If you are at a camp and you're a camp counselor, your common goal, again, is to provide a good experience, a safe, wholesome experience for these campers. And if it's a Christian camp, a camp under which they can thrive and grow spiritually. All right, so those are the 2 key things I want you to recognize for small group, is the size and that they are going towards a common goal. Now, as we recognize that and we look at Bruce Tuckman's theory, he says, all right, once you've got this small group of 3 to 15, watch these 5 stages of development. First is the forming stage, the stage where the members are going to try to find out about each other. Go back to that camp counselor. You've got counselors coming from all over America, right, to work together. And during that first week, maybe they're, hey, what school did you go to? Where did you grow up? What's your major in college? All kinds of different things in the forming stage are occurring. Next, we have what Tuckman calls the storming stage. The storming stage. And that's where the groups will address different conflicts that can emerge. Again, if you think about a jury, some interpersonal conflicts might occur. Perhaps you just don't like that person who's sitting across from you. Perhaps there's a task issue. There's some conflict occurring because one juror says, I thought I remembered, witness number 6 making this statement. And another juror says, no, that is not what was said. So you've got this moment of tension that can occur during storming. Then Tuckman would assert that we move on to the norming stage. The norming stage. Again, the first 2 stages are just trying to really find out each other and find out what's going on. The norming stage, though, you really get a cohesion. You really get a glue. That's a good thing. The group will begin to feel united, and they start to say we instead of just I. There's not just the personal agenda at stake here. The group really sees this need to progress forward. They want to go. They want to accomplish. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. And so you have to oftentimes work your way through the awkwardness of the storming stage before you get to the norming stage. The norming stage then naturally really flows into the cohesion stage. Cohesion, just like it says, members participate more and more and they're satisfied. In other words, if I feel like you're listening to me and I feel like we've got the same common goal, we are really starting to move forward, and there's really this pressure. The individual who tries to be tries to perhaps thwart the group, really is pressured to just give in. Now that's where we start seeing the whole group working together, the strength of the group, cohesion stage. Then finally we have the performing stage. That's where they establish the procedures and the role structure, and they really, this is pivotal for the final decision. And then after your performing stage, you'll get to that final, this is what we've got to accomplish. The jury needs to try to figure out, are they guilty? Are they not guilty? Are we going to let this be a hung jury because we simply cannot decide on it? Oftentimes, you'll find some books that would actually give you a number 6, and that's your adjourning stage. You say, well, isn't that an obvious? Well, yes and no. The adjourning stage for a group that accomplishes what it wants to. For example, go back to the camp counselors. At the end of summer, they have to go home, right? So they adjourn because of the nature of camp being most often that which occurs in summer. Though you may still have some other small camps throughout the year, the majority of the camps are summer. So the time frame will cause for the adjournment. Perhaps if you've got some politicians who are unfortunately involved in some, unethical proceedings, then perhaps the law would actually step in and say, this must be adjourned. This is illegal. In other words, you can at times have outside forces that come in upon the adjournment. But the adjournment then is the complete conclusion of this small group, at which time, members go on. Perhaps they join another small group. Sometimes they stay in contact. Nowadays with Facebook, it's much easier to stay in contact with perhaps friends that you've met during a period of time. But these are really good steps: the forming, storming, norming, cohesion, performing, and then if you want to add that 6th one, the adjourning stage. Those are absolutely interesting. And listen, next time you're involved in a small group, watch it. Watch the chemistry. Watch how that occurs and learn from it. They have to actually go through that storming stage sometimes in order to function well. You have to have those small conflicts, but most books that you will read on communication theory say, look, you've got to try to keep the conflicts within a small group at the task level. You don't want them interpersonal, because if you keep a lot of conflicts at the interpersonal level, sometimes people cannot work beyond that. Now you say, all right, so Mrs. Morris, let's keep going towards communication. I'll do that. Recognize this, that groups can share rules. They can share standards. Those are often referred to as the norms. So again, within this group, what are the rules, spoken and unspoken? What are the standards, spoken and unspoken? I really want you to think of this as you consider any kind of global work or intercontinental, communication that occurs. We have a lot of industries, right, that have to go international and cross-cultural. And it is really, really, really necessary that if you're going to do something like this, you understand the cultural norms of the group. Very simply stated, and there are many, many beyond this, but oftentimes you can think of a norm as that which would apply to hygiene or hairstyles or greetings. And again, think cross-cultural. In America, we have no problem extending a handshake, but that is not necessarily the greeting in other countries. For example, you go over into the Asian culture and you might find yourself with a necessary bow. In other places, it's actually the kiss on the cheek if you go on into the Mideast. But again, it's really important for you as a communicator to understand what are the group norms when it does come to the greetings. What are the group norms when it comes to hygiene? My husband and I took an international trip once, and it was really, it was very normal for the people with whom we were staying to shower maybe once a week, even once every 2 weeks. That was fine. And it was a very, very hot climate. That was the norm for them. Okay, so you just kind of learn to, that's interesting. Not sure I want to live that way, but understand how they function within their norms. Now, recognize this. You can create a powerful group environment, especially if you are the leader, The key is then that each member feels like they're part of a highly connected and supported confidence and community. In other words, you can have a team, and if the team feels like their input is not necessary, if the members feel like no one is listening to them, they will not feel connected, they will not feel supportive, and your community, your sense of confidence for these individuals does not grow. So again, much of this really lies on the shoulders of the leader. It is crucial that the leader is constantly communicating, constantly questioning. Do you feel like, am I listening to you? And if somebody says to you, I don't feel like anybody's listening to me, you should not shrug that off and say, oh, personal. No, you need to stop, go back and say, what was it that caused you to think that way? What can I do to help you not feel that way? Right? Groups, though, let's keep moving on. Groups and communication really help people succeed. At Maranatha, we have what's known as the FIT program. It's a personal wellness program, and owned Jeff Pill, who is just an amazing motivator. I think he is a master motivator. And one of the things that he has that has helped the program successful is somewhat of a buddy system. All right, you're going to exercise. Well, who are you accountable to? Where can you make that accountability? How can I help you succeed? Let me help you. It's all group communication. And that, to me, has been fascinating to watch. Fascinating to watch the success of that program. Now, again, look at this picture. So groups can be very powerful in a good way, but look at this picture of a precious Jewish Holocaust victim. You've got a child who is obviously ailing due to malnourishment. And this picture was used very specifically by two people, Eunice Cooper and Maria Jahoda. Obviously, there's a Jewish name there, right? What they did is they showed this picture along with a caption to 160 white, non-Jewish working men. Okay, this is back around 1947. So this picture of this gaunt child. And here's the caption that was underneath it. And again, I want you to think group communication, right? We're thinking about how something like this could impact a group, not just a person. Now we're thinking of groups. This is what the caption read. In case I need a transfusion, doctor, I want to make certain I don't get anything but blue, sixth generation American blood. Now, if you were to see that, and you see this gaunt, sickly child who is requesting, all right, if I need blood, it can only specifically be, American blood, what would you say to that? When I saw that, I thought, well, how ridiculous. Don't you just need to make sure you get healthy blood for a blood transfusion? But understand that there was still at this time a fair amount of anti-Jewish sentiment that was very prevalent. And so these two researchers showed this picture along with this caption to 160 white men. And then they asked this question to these individuals to whom they had shown this picture. As you look at it, how does this make you feel about prejudice? If I were to see this picture today, I would say, how ridiculous. That is definitely a biasness there, and that's just awful and wicked and very anti-Semitic, right? So what do you think, though, the people back in the 40s said? Sadly, many thought that the purpose of this picture was to legitimize their prejudice against the Jews, and therefore the researchers found that many of these 160 said, well, see, if others are prejudiced, then I can be prejudiced too. And understand the power of group thinking. It is so important, and that's why nowadays we actually have research that deals just with, for example, what created some of the riots in various situations throughout American history. What was the group mindset? what prompted these individuals to go ahead and riot in the way they did. And oftentimes it's because of the group thinking. Now, most powerful groups are those which can actually do major impact upon individuals. In other words, we've got lots of groups that may not do anything, correct? But the powerful groups can impact individuals. And here's what I need you to recognize. We've got really 3 groups. Oh my goodness, sorry about that. Once again, when it came up from my PowerPoint into Adobe, it just did some very interesting things here. So sorry about that. First of all, the primary group, if you'll write that down, please. That's a group of 2 or more, and the key is that's a long-standing relationship. And what I tried to bold there was that it's oftentimes face-to-face, such as, and I want you to recognize family or society or military. The primary group, in other words, are the groups that you interact with oftentimes on a daily basis. That's why military becomes a primary group. You've got those men out in foxholes. You've got those men defending and women defending each other. That is a primary group. They are face-to-face association. Your family is face-to-face association. The people you work with, those oftentimes, if you have a good relationship with them, they can have the most compelling impact on what you believe, what you think, what you do. Next, we have a reference group. So the primary group are the day-to-day interaction that you're closest with. Reference group are the group identified with and used as a standard of reference, but maybe you don't belong necessarily to that group. In other words, you can reference them, you can talk about them, even though you're not a part of them. For example, we've got a student who wants to be a part of a group in a dorm, so he dresses or tries to act like that group, even though he's not a member of that group. Okay, so the reference group, maybe you want to be a part of it, you're not part of it yet, but you really want to be associated with it. Well, if you want to be associated with it, there's a strong chance then that you will start acting and talking like them. That can be very much true if you start looking at gangs and researching gangs. Oftentimes there is, bless their hearts, the reason oftentimes that people join gangs is really because they want a sense of belonging. Somehow that sense of belonging is lacking in the life, oftentimes, of a young teenager, and they see this group over there and they say, I want to be a part of a group. And even though the initiation can be just horrific and awful, you know, they can get beaten or they are responsible for killing or hurting someone. These individuals so desperately want to belong to a group that they begin acting like them, talking like them, and then ultimately desiring to join that group. That's the reference group. Finally, you've got the casual group. Very distance. Okay? It's a distance setting. It's a one-time group of people. They don't really know each other before they were brought together, and they might just casually talk. You know, you're in an elevator. I don't consider those people my friends, but if it's a big group, you know, I'm part of a group right then at that moment. A group riding on a bus. A group attending a football game, okay? So obviously, as you look at this list, if it comes to, for example, who I'm going to listen to, who's going to have the most impact, it's not going to be the casual group. The reference group might begin to impact me, but that group that I'm with daily, that primary group, my family, my military unit, those are going to tend to have the most impact on me. Now, you knew it was coming, right, in our field. We want to be able to we want to be able to generalize about how people communicate so that we can give perhaps outcomes, ultimate effects of the communication. You know, go back to the gang. So if we know that kids want to belong to a gang, and we know that gangs their desire to have new members, then how could we as a culture step in, communicate to these kids, hey, we've got something even better, and try to save them from joining a gang? That would be the value of seeing group communication. When we look at groups and politics, always fascinating. You know, how do people vote the way they vote? Well, if you think of primary groups, we said those are your long-standing face-to-face associations. There was a study, and it said that 75% of first-time voters, and that is huge. How do they vote? What do you think? They vote just like whom? 75% vote like their parents. If their parents are involved, if their parents, you know, sit around the dinner table and talk about who they're going to vote for, then 75%. That's huge. Why? Well, how old are they? the first time you can vote? You have to be a teenager. So you've heard your parents for years. You've heard them talk about things around the dinner table for years. And oftentimes, maybe by the time you're 50, you have different opinions, different ideas. But the first time, that's a biggie, 75%. Let's keep thinking groups, okay? So parents as a primary group, can you want to think about how can we impact groups? Alcoholics Anonymous has been fairly successful in helping people overcome some of their besetting sins. Now, I'm not an advocate of Alcoholics Anonymous 100%, but it is intriguing if you go do research on them. They really understand and understood the value of group thinking. Bill, who was one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote, and this is what he said: the moment the 12-step work forms a group, a discovery is made that most individuals cannot recover unless there is a group. Did you catch that? They cannot recover unless there is a group that they can reference. That means there's power in a group. Okay? Realization dawns on each member that he is but a small part of a great whole, that no personal sacrifice is too great for preservation of the fellowship. He or she learns that the clamor of desires and ambitions in him must be silenced whenever these could damage the group. The group must survive, or the individual will not. Absolutely fascinating. Alcoholics Anonymous recognizes, I believe they worded there's a greater power. Now, I would say the greater power is the Lord Jesus Christ, who can give us the strength and the courage from any sin. Alcoholics Anonymous will not go that far, but they do definitely understand the power of group and how group think can really impact people. Let's keep going. Okay, as you watch TV, as you look at ads in newspapers, start watching how they use the group thought. Okay, you'll start have the group thought instead of just the I. There are lots of commercials that are I, but there are just as many that are very subtle with group. For example, this has a voiceover saying, "I bet a lot of your friends are using this and you know it." Again, my apologies. I am so sorry that this PowerPoint just keeps not fully loading. I wish it were. Maybe if you want, I can send you this so that you can see it better. But love technology, but sometimes it just throws us for a loop, doesn't it? Alrighty, but the voiceover here says, "I bet a lot of your friends are doing this." In other words, the group is doing it. Why aren't you doing it? Can really impact people. If you've got your reference group, then that can be a subtle. That last commercial was subtle, but we can flat out have very, very overt. They're in no way attempting to be subtle. Look at these titles of books. Definitely an attempt by the authors, don't you think, to impact a group thinking. I mean, I look at the corner one, responsible drinking, and that really just frustrates me. I don't believe there is any such thing as responsible drinking. I think too many people, this is a personal opinion, but I think Romans 12:8 says, or 12:1 and 2, we're not our own. We're bought with a price. And too many people think I can control drinking. And you know what? Too often that is just not the case. So my philosophy is I'm going to stay as far away from it as I can. I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to be involved in social drinking. But look, here's a book. Responsible drinking. Definitely after a group mindset. How about gambling secrets? Insider tips that casinos don't want you to know. Almost like, hey, we're breaking the group here and we'll let you in. Again, I am anti-gambling. Too many people think I can go in and do it. How about preventing homosexuality? A parent's guide to that. On the flip of that, you've got a book saying, throw yourself into immoral, unethical situations. And you have a book like My Virginity is Ruining My Sex Life. How sad. But listen, if you're going to mass produce these books, the ultimate goal is you're going to mass impact a society. And that is then impacting a group mindset. We really have a group mindset, which is why it is so imperative, crew, that we are grounded in the Word of God and that we find ourselves in the house of the Lord. Scripture tells us, I was glad when he said, let us go into the house of the Lord. There is something encouraging and molding and shaping about being together in a church that helps us, as long as we have a good church with a good pastor, move forward to bring glory to the Lord's name. So, groups and communication lessons. Just a couple things I want you to write down, okay? Number one, that groups serve to anchor attitudes and then make them hard to change. Groups serve to anchor the attitudes and make them hard to change. Teenagers can be exceptionally vulnerable. That's why for them, church can be very, very necessary in helping to anchor their attitude. Hey, why shouldn't I become involved in this behavior? Why shouldn't I go do this? Wow, well, you know what? I'm thinking there are about 10 people in my youth group that I would let down if I failed in this fashion. Number two, recognize that knowledge of the group that a person belongs to or identifies with can help us predict that person's behavior. If I know that you belong to the NRA, then I can probably predict your behavior. If I know that you belong to the AARP, it might help me. And then that becomes a whole nother issue of understanding ad placement. And that's a fascinating study in and of itself. What magazines will I put this ad in? Who's my target audience? Who buys this kind of magazine? If that's not my target audience, then I'm not going to waste my money there. Number three, oh my, can't even read that one at all. Let me read number three to you, okay? Oh goodness, sorry about this, crew. 3, effective programs of communication. Effective programs of communication involve a combination of mass communication and interpersonal communication. Okay, one more time. I'm so sorry. Effective programs of communication often involve a combination of mass communication and interpersonal communication. One more time. They often involve a combination of mass communication and interpersonal communication. In other words, we understand mass communication. We understand how, the internet can impact millions and millions, and yet we cannot forget the fact there is still that great, great power in a one-on-one setting. One-on-one setting. Okay, number 4. I'm nervous about how it's going to show up. Yeah, there we go. Let me read number 4 to you. Sometimes ways can be found to obtain, let me read this once, okay, and then I'll just listen to it and then we'll go back. Sometimes ways can be found to obtain some of the advantages of interpersonal communication through the mass comm. One more time. Sometimes ways can be found to obtain some of the advantages of interpersonal communication through mass communication. Sometimes ways can be found to obtain advantages of interpersonal through the mass. In other words, sometimes you can take that big, big communication, the group communication, and you can see what's working there, and you can bring it down to that even smaller group. You're communicating with 15, and it seems to be going well. Maybe you can take some of the things that you learned there, bring it back to dinner table with your family, and get an even stronger communication there because you realized that you were listening better, or that you were responding, or you were trying to avoid conflict at the interpersonal level, and you were keeping it to the the situation and the task at hand. But group communication, group communication is so interesting. It's so fascinating. And as you deal with technology, both if you're just in a board meeting or you're dealing with people over the internet, I think you'll find a lot to do with group communication. I would encourage you to read